The telegram had arrived that morning with news that changed everything. And now Julia Hamilton stood alone on the depot platform in Agua Caliente, Arizona, watching the afternoon train disappear into the shimmering heat of the desert horizon as tears streamed down her dusty cheeks. It was June of 1882, and the relentless sun beat down on the small railroad station like a hammer on an anvil. But Julia barely noticed the heat as she clutched the crumpled yellow paper in her trembling hands. Her father was dead. The man who had sent for her, who had promised her a new life out west after her mother's passing in Philadelphia, had died 3 days before her arrival from a sudden heart attack while working his cattle ranch 20 miles north of town. She had sold everything she owned back east to make this journey, had spent her last dollars on the train ticket that was supposed to reunite her with the only family she had left. Now she stood in a town where she knew no one, with exactly $4.37 in her small leather purse, no place to stay, and no way to get back home even if she wanted to. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave, and she sank down onto her trunk, shoulders shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. At 22 years old, Julia had thought herself prepared for the hardships of frontier life, but nothing could have prepared her for this crushing loneliness and fear. The depot platform was mostly empty now, just a few stragglers collecting their luggage and heading into town. Julia tried to compose herself, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that had once been white but was now gray with travel dust. She had no idea what to do next. The telegram had come from a lawyer in town, a Mr. Henderson, but his office would surely be closed by now, and even if it were not, what could he do for her tonight? She needed shelter, needed food, needed time to think and plan, but most of all she needed to stop crying on this public platform where anyone could see her falling apart. The sound of boots on wooden planks made her look up, and through her blurred vision she saw a man approaching. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his dusty work shirt. He wore denim trousers, scuffed leather boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face from the brutal afternoon sun. As he drew closer, he reached up and removed his hat, revealing a strong-jawed face with concerned hazel eyes that looked at her with genuine kindness, rather than the curiosity or pity she might have expected. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice low and gentle, with the slight drawl of someone who had spent years under western skies. "I do not mean to intrude, but I could not help but notice you seem to be in some distress. Do you need a ride home?" Julia looked up at him, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks despite her best efforts to stop them. "I have no home," she managed to say, her voice breaking on the last word. "Not anymore." The man's expression shifted from concern to something deeper, a compassion that seemed to reach right into her chest and squeeze her already aching heart. He glanced at her trunk, then back at her face, and she watched him process the situation with quick intelligence. "You just arrived on that train," he said, not really asking but confirming what he had observed. "Were you expected by someone?" Julia nodded, unable to speak for a moment as another sob caught in her throat. She held out the telegram with a shaking hand, and after a brief hesitation, the man took it and read it quickly. His jaw tightened, and he looked back at her with understanding in his eyes. "Thomas Hamilton," he said quietly. "I knew him. Not well, but we did business a few times when I was buying cattle. He was a good man. I am truly sorry for your loss." The simple sincerity in his voice nearly undid her completely. Julia pressed her handkerchief to her mouth, trying desperately to regain some measure of control. "He was my father," she whispered. "My only family. I sold everything I had to come here, and now I have nothing and nowhere to go." The man was quiet for a moment, his hat turning slowly in his hands as he thought. Then he looked at her directly, his gaze steady and honest. "My name is Andrew Parker," he said. "I run a horse ranch about 5 miles south of town. It is not much, but I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who lives in a small cottage on the property. She is a widow, a good woman, and I know she would be willing to put you up for a few days while you sort things out. I would not suggest it if I thought it improper, but I cannot in good conscience leave you here with nowhere to go." Julia stared at him, uncertain whether to trust this stranger or be wary of his offer. But something in his eyes, in the straightforward way he presented the situation, made her instincts say he was being genuine. And really, what choice did she have? She could spend her precious few dollars on a hotel room for a night or two, but that would only delay the inevitable problem of what came next. "Why would you help me?" she asked, needing to understand. "You do not even know me." Andrew Parker met her gaze without flinching. "Out here, we look after each other when we can," he said simply. "Your father was trying to do right by you, bringing you out here. Just because he passed before he could help you does not mean you should be left to fend for yourself. Besides," he added with the ghost of a smile, "Mrs. Chen has been telling me for months that the place needs a woman's touch beyond her own cottage. Maybe you could help her around the ranch for a bit, earn your keep while you figure out what you want to do. If you want to stay in the territory, that is. I understand if you would rather head back east." The offer was more generous than Julia had any right to expect, and yet she found herself considering it seriously. What did she have back in Philadelphia? No family, no home, no job waiting for her. She had left because there was nothing for her there anymore, and despite this terrible beginning, perhaps Arizona still held possibilities her old life did not. "I would not want to be a burden," she said carefully, "but if you're Mrs. Chen truly would not mind the company, and if I can make myself useful, then yes. I would be grateful for a place to stay while I sort things out. Thank you, Mr. Parker." "Just Andrew," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "And you are Julia Hamilton." "Well, Miss Hamilton, let me get your trunk loaded onto my wagon and we will head out. The sun will be setting in a few hours, and the road is easier to travel in daylight." Andrew lifted her heavy trunk as though it weighed nothing, muscles flexing beneath his shirt as he carried it down the platform steps to where a sturdy wagon stood hitched to 2 patient horses. Julia followed, wiping the last of her tears away and trying to pull herself together. She had cried enough for one day. Now she needed to be strong, needed to face whatever came next with as much courage as she could muster. The wagon seat was high, and Andrew offered his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living, and Julia felt a strange flutter in her chest as his fingers closed around hers. She pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to her emotional state and exhaustion from travel, and settled onto the worn wooden seat. Andrew climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to the horses. The wagon rolled forward, leaving the depot behind as they headed down the dusty main street of Agua Caliente. Julia looked around at the town that was supposed to have been her new home. It was smaller than she had expected, maybe a dozen buildings lining the wide dirt road, with more scattered behind and beyond. There was a general store, a saloon, a hotel that looked like it had seen better days, a church with a white steeple, and various other establishments whose purposes she could not immediately determine. "It is not much," Andrew said, as if reading her thoughts, "but it is growing. 5 years ago there were only 3 buildings here. The railroad coming through changed everything." "How long have you lived here?" Julia asked, grateful for the distraction of conversation. "I came to Arizona in '76. Andrew said, guiding the horses around a deep rut in the road. Worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved every penny I could, and bought my own spread 3 years ago. It is not a big operation, just me and a couple of hands who help with the horses, but it is mine. That means something out here. Julia heard the pride in his voice and understood it. Ownership, independence, the ability to build something with your own hands and call it yours. That was what her father had wanted too, what he had tried to offer her by bringing her west. "What kind of horses do you raise?" she asked. "Mostly working horses, ranch stock," Andrew replied. "But I have been building a breeding program for better quality animals, trying to improve the bloodlines, produce horses that are strong enough for ranch work but smart and quick too. It is slow going, but I am starting to develop a reputation. Had a buyer come all the way from Tucson last month for one of my 3-year-olds. There was passion in his voice when he talked about his horses, and Julia found herself listening with genuine interest, despite her grief and exhaustion. They left the town behind, heading south on a road that was little more than 2-wheel ruts through the desert scrubland. The landscape was unlike anything Julia had ever seen. All sun-bleached earth and scattered vegetation, with mountains rising in the purple distance. It was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, and she wondered if she would ever come to love it the way her father apparently had. "Tell me about Mrs. Chen," Julia said after a while. "You said she is a widow," Andrew nodded. "Her husband worked on the railroad. He died in an accident 4 years ago, and she was left with nothing. I needed someone to help with the cooking and washing, and she needed work and a place to stay, so it worked out for both of us. She is from China originally, came over with her husband when they were building the rails. She does not talk much about her past, but she is good people. Fair warning though, she will feed you until you cannot move and will fuss over you like a mother hen. She cannot help herself." The affection in his voice was clear, and Julia felt some of her nervousness ease. If Andrew Parker spoke that way about his housekeeper, he was probably the decent man he seemed to be. "She sounds wonderful," Julia said honestly. "She is," Andrew agreed. "And I think she will be glad of the company. It gets lonely out here sometimes, especially for someone like her. The Chinese are not always treated well in these parts, and she does not go into town much because of it." Julia heard the disapproval in his voice and respected him for it. Prejudice existed everywhere, she knew, but it was heartening to meet someone who did not share in it. "I look forward to meeting her," she said. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon, the clip-clop of hooves, and the occasional call of a bird. The sun was lowering in the sky now, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange, and Julia felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. She was still devastated about her father, still frightened about her uncertain future, but for the first time since receiving that telegram, she felt like perhaps she might survive this after all. "Can I ask what you were planning to do once you got here?" Andrew said eventually. "Did your father have specific plans for you?" Julia shook her head. "His letters were not very detailed about that. He said he had a ranch, that there was plenty of work to be done, and that I would be welcome. I think he imagined I would help him run the household, maybe eventually the ranch itself. He wanted to teach me the business," he said. "He thought I was smart enough to learn it." "I am sure you are," Andrew said, glancing at her. "It does not take a man to run a good ranch, just someone with sense and determination. I have known plenty of women who could outwork and outsmart most men when it came to livestock and land management." Julia appreciated the sentiment, even if she had her doubts about her own abilities in that regard. "I suppose I will never know now," she said quietly. "His ranch will be sold, I assume. I doubt he left it to me, and even if he did, I would not know what to do with it." You might be surprised, Andrew said. Henderson, the lawyer who sent you that telegram, he is honest. He will make sure you get whatever your father intended for you. Tomorrow, if you feel up to it, I can take you into town to see him and sort out the legal matters. That would be very kind, Julia said, grateful beyond measure for this stranger's continued help. I do not know how I will ever repay you for your kindness. Andrew shook his head. No repayment needed, just helping a neighbor, or what should have been a neighbor if things had gone differently. They crested a low rise, and Andrew pointed ahead to where a cluster of buildings was visible in the distance. That is home, he said, and Julia heard the satisfaction in his voice. As they drew closer, she could make out a main house, a large barn, several corrals where horses moved in the fading light, and a few smaller outbuildings. It was not grand, but it was solid and well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and careful attention. A small cottage stood apart from the other buildings, smoke rising from its chimney, and as the wagon approached, a small figure emerged from the doorway. Mrs. Chen was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, with gray-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple dress and an apron, and her face creased into a confused smile as she saw Andrew had a passenger. Andrew brought the wagon to a halt and jumped down, then moved to help Julia descend. "Mrs. Chen," he called out in a warm voice, "this is Miss Julia Hamilton. She has had some very bad news and needs a place to stay for a while. I was hoping she could take the spare room in your cottage if you are willing." Mrs. Chen came closer, her dark eyes taking in Julia's tear-stained face and rumpled traveling clothes with quick understanding. Of course," she said, her English heavily accented but clear. "Poor girl, you come, I make tea, make food, you need rest." The motherly concern in her voice was exactly what Julia needed in that moment, and she felt fresh tears threatening. "Thank you," she managed. "You are very kind to take in a stranger." "No stranger," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You are guest of Andrew, so you are my guest too. Come now, I show you room." Andrew lifted Julia's trunk again and carried it toward the cottage. "I will bring this in for you," he said. "You get settled, and I will check on the horses. Mrs. Chen will take good care of you." Julia followed the small woman into the cottage, which was simple but immaculately clean and surprisingly cozy. There was a main room with a kitchen area, a table and chairs, and a comfortable-looking chair by the fireplace. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. Mrs. Chen led her to one of these and opened the door to reveal a small but pleasant room with a narrow bed, a washstand, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "You rest here," Mrs. Chen said. "I bring water for washing, then make supper. You must be very hungry after travel." Andrew appeared in the doorway with the trunk, which he set carefully at the foot of the bed. "If you need anything, the main house is just over there," he said, pointing through the window. "Mrs. Chen knows where to find me. Try to get some rest, Miss Hamilton. Things will look clearer in the morning." "Thank you," Julia said, meaning it with all her heart. "Thank you both." After they left, closing the door softly behind them, Julia sank onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. Her father was gone. She would never see him again, never hear his laugh or feel his arms around her in a hug. He had been a distant figure for much of her life, working in the West while she grew up with her mother in Philadelphia, but she had loved him and had been so looking forward to finally building a real relationship with him. Now that chance was gone forever. But even in her grief, Julia could not help but feel a spark of something else. Gratitude for Andrew Parker's unexpected kindness, curiosity about this strange new world she found herself in, and beneath it all, a determination not to let this tragedy defeat her. Her father had believed she was strong enough to build a life in the West. Perhaps it was time to prove him right, even if he would never know it. Mrs. Chen returned with a pitcher of warm water and a basin, along with fresh towels. "You wash, change clothes," she said gently. "I call you when food is ready. You need to eat, keep strength up." Julia did as she was told, washing away the dust and grime of travel and changing into a clean dress from her trunk. She pinned her dark hair back up properly, trying to restore some order to her appearance, and studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her hazel eyes were red and puffy from crying, her face pale despite the sunburn on her nose and cheeks, but she was still herself. Still Julia Hamilton, determined to survive whatever life threw at her. The smell of cooking food drew her back to the main room, where Mrs. Chen had set the table and was ladling soup into bowls. "Sit, sit," the older woman insisted, and Julia obeyed, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She had not eaten since early morning, and even then she had been too anxious about her arrival to manage more than a few bites of bread. The soup was delicious, rich with vegetables and chicken, seasoned with flavors Julia did not recognize but found delightful. There was fresh bread too, still warm from the oven, and butter that melted into golden pools. Julia ate slowly at first, then with increasing appetite as her body reminded her of its needs. "This is wonderful," she said to Mrs. Chen. "Thank you so much." The older woman smiled, pleased. "You eat more," she urged. "Too thin. Need to build strength for life here. Arizona is not easy place but is good place if you are strong." "How long have you been here?" Julia asked between bites. 7 years now," Mrs. Chen said, settling into her own chair with a cup of tea. "First in railroad camp, then here. This is better. Andrew is good man, treat me with respect, not everyone does." Julia heard the weight of experience behind those words and nodded in understanding. "He seems very kind," she said carefully. "Is he married?" Mrs. Chen shook her head. "No wife. He worked too hard, I think. Always with the horses, always building, fixing, planning. Good man should have family, but he say he will marry when he is ready, not before. Stubborn." But there was affection in her voice as she said it. After supper, Julia helped clear the dishes despite Mrs. Chen's protests, and then the exhaustion of the day caught up with her all at once. She could barely keep her eyes open, and Mrs. Chen shooed her off to bed like the mother hen Andrew had described. Julia climbed under the clean quilts and let herself sink into the soft mattress. Her last thought before sleep claimed her being a confused jumble of grief, gratitude, and the memory of kind hazel eyes beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing where she was, and then memory came flooding back and with it the ache of loss. But she had cried enough yesterday. Today she needed to be practical, to meet with the lawyer and understand her situation fully, and then to make decisions about her future. Julia dressed carefully in her most respectable outfit, a dark blue traveling suit that was a bit warm for Arizona but appropriate for a business meeting. She braided her hair and pinned it up, trying to look competent and mature rather than like the lost young woman who had sobbed on the depot platform. When she emerged from her room, she found Mrs. Chen had breakfast ready and Andrew sitting at the table with his own plate, clearly having been invited over for the meal. He stood when she entered, his manners impeccable, and waited until she was seated before sitting back down himself. "Good morning, Miss Hamilton," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," Julia admitted. "And please call me Julia. After everything you have done for me, formality seems unnecessary." Andrew smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something warm and approachable. "Julia, then." And I am Andrew, as I said before. I thought if you were willing, we could head into town after breakfast and see Mr. Henderson. Get the legal matters sorted out." "I would appreciate that very much," Julia said, accepting a plate from Mrs. Chen. The breakfast was hearty and delicious, and she found herself eating with better appetite than she had shown in days. The ride into Agua Caliente was pleasant in the relative cool of morning, and Julia found herself relaxing a bit as she and Andrew talked. He told her about the ranch, about his plans for expanding the breeding program, about the challenges of making a living in such an unforgiving climate. She told him about Philadelphia, about working as a seamstress after her mother died, about the letters from her father that had painted such a vivid picture of possibility in the West. It must have taken courage to come all this way alone, Andrew observed as they approached the town. Not many women would have done it. "I was not brave," Julia said honestly. "I was desperate. There was nothing left for me in Philadelphia except poverty and loneliness. At least here I thought I would have family." "You still have possibilities," Andrew said quietly. "That counts for something." Mr. Henderson's office was above the general store, and Andrew helped Julia down from the wagon before tying the horses. They climbed the narrow exterior stairs and found the lawyer's door open, a small bell jingling as they entered. Franklin Henderson was a middle-aged man with spectacles and thinning hair, dressed in a rumpled suit that suggested he cared more about his work than his appearance. He looked up from his desk and immediately stood when he saw Julia. "Miss Hamilton," he said, coming around the desk with his hand extended. "I am so very sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man, and his death was a shock to all of us." Julia shook his hand, grateful that she had no tears left to shed in front of this stranger. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I received your telegram yesterday." "Please, sit down," Henderson said, gesturing to chairs. He glanced at Andrew with mild curiosity, and Andrew explained, "I helped Miss Hamilton yesterday when she arrived. She is staying at my ranch temporarily." Henderson nodded, seeming to understand the situation. "That was kind of you, Parker." He turned his attention back to Julia. "I assume you want to know about your father's estate and what provisions he made." "Yes," Julia said, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I need to understand my situation." Henderson returned to his desk and pulled out a folder. "Your father filed a will with me about 6 months ago, shortly after his heart troubles began. He was not a wealthy man, Miss Hamilton, but he was not destitute either. The ranch is yours, along with all livestock, equipment, and the sum of $847 currently held in the bank. There are some debts, mostly relating to improvements he was making on the property, but nothing that cannot be managed from the sale of cattle if necessary." Julia stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "The ranch is mine." "Yes," Henderson confirmed. "He left everything to you, his only child. The property is about 400 acres with a house, barn, and other outbuildings. He had 40 head of cattle and a few horses. It is not a large operation, but it is productive. Your father made a decent living from it." "But I do not know anything about running a ranch," Julia said, panic rising in her chest. "I have never even been on one before yesterday." "You could sell it," Henderson suggested gently. "The land alone would fetch a good price, and with the cattle and equipment, you would have enough money to return east and set yourself up comfortably. Or you could hire a foreman to run it for you and take the profits. There are options." Julia looked at Andrew, who had been silent throughout this exchange. "What do you think I should do?" she asked, needing advice from someone who understood this world. Andrew was quiet for a moment, clearly considering his words carefully. "I think you should take some time before deciding," he said finally. "Henderson is right that you have options, but you do not need to choose today. Why do not you go out and look at the property, see what your father built, and then make your decision? If you decide to sell, Henderson can help you find buyers. If you decide to try running it, there are people who can teach you what you need to know. Would you take me to see it? Julia asked impulsively. The ranch, I mean. I would like to see what my father was building. Of course, Andrew said without hesitation. We can go this afternoon if you like. After finalizing a few more details with Henderson and signing some papers, Julia and Andrew left the office and headed back toward the wagon. But before they could leave town, a woman's voice called out, "Andrew Parker, is that you?" They turned to see a woman approaching, perhaps 30 years old with blonde hair and a pretty face that was marred by a calculating expression. She wore an expensive dress that seemed out of place in the dusty frontier town, and her eyes were fixed on Andrew with proprietary interest. "Hello, Margaret," Andrew said, his tone polite but noticeably cooler than it had been when talking to Julia. "How are you?" "I am well," the woman said, her gaze shifting to Julia with undisguised curiosity. "And who is this?" "This is Miss Julia Hamilton," Andrew said. "Julia, this is Margaret Sutton. Her father owns the largest ranch in the area." "Oh, you are Thomas Hamilton's daughter," Margaret said, her eyes lighting up with interest that made Julia uncomfortable. "I heard about his passing. Such a tragedy. I suppose you will be selling his land. My father would be very interested in purchasing it. The property adjoins ours, you see." Julia felt instinctively that she did not like this woman, though she could not have said exactly why. "I have not decided what I will do yet," she said carefully. Margaret's smile tightened slightly. "Well, when you do decide, please let me know. I am sure we can offer you a very fair price." Her attention returned to Andrew. "You must come to dinner soon, Andrew. Father has been asking after you, and I have been hoping for a chance to speak with you about something important." "I have been very busy with the horses," Andrew said, clearly uncomfortable. "But I will try to stop by when I can." "See that you do," Margaret said, and Julia caught an undertone in her voice that suggested this was more command than invitation. With a final measuring look at Julia, Margaret swept away, leaving the scent of expensive perfume in her wake. "Old friend?" Julia asked as they continued to the wagon. Andrew grimaced. "More like persistent neighbor. Margaret has decided she wants to be married, and she has set her sights on me. Her father is one of the richest men in the territory, and she is used to getting what she wants. I have tried to discourage her without being outright rude, but she does not take hints well." Julia absorbed this information with mixed feelings. It was none of her business who Andrew courted or married, but she found herself hoping he would not choose someone like Margaret Sutton. The woman had seemed cold and more interested in acquiring Andrew's ranch than in Andrew himself. They stopped at the general store to pick up some supplies Mrs. Chen had requested, and then headed back toward the ranch. Instead of turning in at Andrew's property, though, they continued north on the main road for another hour, until Andrew pointed to a wooden gate with the initials TH carved into the crossbar. "Your father's ranch," he said, guiding the horses through the gate. "Or I suppose it is your ranch now." The property was similar to Andrew's in many ways but smaller and not quite as well maintained. The house was a simple adobe structure that looked sturdy enough but needed some repairs. The barn was larger than Julia had expected, and she could see cattle grazing in a fenced pasture beyond. Everything spoke of a man who had worked hard but had been alone, without the help or companionship that might have made the work easier. They stopped in front of the house, and Andrew helped Julia down. "Would you like to go inside?" he asked gently. Julia nodded, though her throat was tight with emotion. This was where her father had lived, where he had imagined her living with him, where they would have built their new life together if fate had not intervened. She tried the door and found it unlocked, which did not surprise her. People did not lock their doors out here the way they did in cities. The interior was dim and dusty but cleaner than she had expected. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and 2 bedrooms. The furniture was simple and handmade, but solid. On the mantel above the fireplace, Julia found a photograph of her mother and herself, taken years ago in Philadelphia. Her father had kept it displayed where he could see it every day, and the sight of it broke something open inside her chest. Andrew, who had followed her inside, saw her shoulders start to shake and quietly left her alone, stepping back outside to give her privacy. Julia sank into a chair and let herself cry again. Not the panicked tears of yesterday, but a deep, cleansing grief for the father she had lost, and the life they would never share. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she sat in the quiet house and tried to imagine what he would want her to do: sell the ranch and return east. She did not think so. He had wanted her here, had believed she could build a life in the West, run it herself. That seemed impossible, and yet as she looked around at what he had built with his own hands, she felt a stirring of determination. This was hers now. Her inheritance, her possibility, her chance to honor her father's memory by finishing what he had started. She found Andrew sitting on the porch steps, his hat in his hands, staring out at the desert landscape. He stood when she emerged, his eyes searching her face with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I think so," Julia said, and realized it was true. "Andrew, if I decided to try running this place, could you help me? I do not mean do the work for me, but teach me what I need to know. I would pay you, of course, or work it off somehow. I just need someone to help me learn." Andrew studied her for a long moment, and Julia could not read his expression. Finally, he said, "You do not need to pay me. Your father did me a good turn once, selling me a breeding mare at a fair price when he could have gotten more from someone else. I would be glad to help his daughter if she wants to learn the ranching business. But Julia, I have to be honest with you. It is hard work, harder than anything you have probably done before. The land is unforgiving, the weather can be brutal, and you will be working from dawn to dusk most days. Are you sure this is what you want?" Julia looked out at the land that was now hers, at the cattle grazing peacefully, at the mountains rising in the distance. "I am not sure of anything," she admitted, "but I know I do not want to run back east with my tail between my legs. I know my father believed I could do this, and I know I would rather try and fail than never try at all." Andrew smiled then, a genuine expression of respect and approval. "Then let us see what you are made of, Julia Hamilton. We will start tomorrow morning if you are willing. I will come by after I finish my own morning chores and start teaching you what you need to know." Over the next few weeks, Julia threw herself into learning everything Andrew could teach her. She woke before dawn, helped Mrs. Chen with breakfast, and was ready and waiting when Andrew arrived each morning to take her to her father's ranch. He taught her how to check the cattle for illness or injury, how to repair fences, how to manage water resources in the dry climate, how to maintain equipment and buildings. He taught her about the business side too, showing her how to keep records, calculate expenses and profits, and plan for the future. It was the hardest work Julia had ever done. She developed blisters on her hands that turned to calluses, sunburn on her nose and arms despite her best efforts to stay covered, and muscles she had not known existed ached constantly. But she also felt stronger than she had ever felt, more capable and confident. She was building something, learning something, becoming someone she had never imagined she could be. And through it all, she found herself growing increasingly aware of Andrew Parker as more than just a kind neighbor and teacher. She noticed the way he moved with unconscious grace, The way his hands were gentle when handling the animals but strong when doing heavy work. The way his rare smiles lit up his whole face. She noticed how patient he was with her mistakes, how he never made her feel stupid for not knowing things that were second nature to him, how he treated her as an equal even when she clearly was not. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural result of spending so much time with someone who was helping her so much. But her heart knew better. She was falling in love with Andrew Parker, and she had no idea if he felt anything similar for her beyond friendly concern. Mrs. Chen certainly had opinions on the matter. "You like him," she said one evening as they prepared dinner together in the cottage. It was not a question. Julia felt her cheeks heat. "He has been very kind to me." "He looks at you different, Mrs. Chen said, chopping vegetables with quick, efficient motions. "Not like he looks at other women, like you are a precious thing he is afraid to break." "I am sure you are imagining things," Julia said, but her heart was beating faster. Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. "I am old woman. I see what I see. He needs good wife, someone strong and smart. You would be good for him." "Even if that were true, I have nothing to offer him," Julia said quietly. "I am barely keeping my head above water with my own ranch. I cannot even pay him for all the help he has given me." "Love is not about what you can pay," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "It's about what you can give from heart. You think about it." Julia did think about it, late into the night when she lay in her narrow bed and listened to the desert wind. She thought about Andrew's kindness, his strength, his gentleness with animals and with her. She thought about the way her heart lifted when she saw him riding up each morning, the way she found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, the way she felt safe and cared for in his presence. But she also thought about Margaret Sutton, with her expensive dresses and wealthy father, who could offer Andrew social standing and financial security. She thought about her own precarious situation, still learning to run a ranch that might fail at any moment, with nothing to recommend her except determination and a lot of debt. What did she have to offer a man like Andrew Parker? The answer came to her in the form of a crisis. It was late July, nearly 2 months after her arrival in Arizona, and Julia was working in her barn when she heard a commotion from the pasture. She ran outside to find several of her cattle in distress, foaming at the mouth and staggering. Her heart seized with fear, but she forced herself to think clearly. Andrew had taught her about various livestock diseases and poisonings. This looked like they had eaten something toxic. She ran to saddle one of the horses, grateful for Andrew's lessons in riding, and rode as fast as she dared toward his ranch. She found him working with a young horse in the corral and called out, "Andrew, something is wrong with my cattle. I think they have been poisoned." Andrew immediately stopped what he was doing and moved with swift efficiency. "Get the medical kit from the barn," he told one of his ranch hands. "We will need charcoal and oil. Julia, take me to them." They rode back to her ranch together, and Andrew examined the sick cattle with quick competence. "Loco weed," he said grimly. "They must have found a patch of it somewhere on your property. We need to drench them with oil and charcoal to absorb the poison, and then we need to find that weed patch and destroy it before more cattle get into it." For the next several hours, they worked together to save the cattle. It was hot, dirty, exhausting work, and they lost one cow despite their best efforts. But they saved the others, and then they spent the rest of the afternoon searching the property, until they found the small patch of loco weed growing near an arroyo. Andrew showed her what it looked like and helped her dig it all up and burn it. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, and they were both covered in dust and sweat. Julia felt like she might collapse from exhaustion, but she also felt a fierce pride. She had recognized there was a problem, had taken action, and with Andrew's help had saved most of her herd. She had not panicked or fallen apart. She had done what needed to be done. "You did well today," Andrew said as they washed up at the pump behind the house. "You kept your head, moved quickly, and made good decisions. Your father would be proud of you." The praise meant more to Julia than he could know, but what happened next meant even more. As they were preparing to ride back to Andrew's ranch, a storm rolled in with shocking speed, the way summer storms did in the desert. The sky turned black, lightning cracked across the heavens, and rain began to fall in blinding sheets. Andrew grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the house. "We will have to wait it out here," he said, leading the horses into the barn first to ensure they were sheltered. By the time he joined Julia in the house, they were both soaked through and shivering despite the warm evening air. Julia lit a lamp and stoked the fire in the fireplace, grateful her father had left wood stacked nearby. Andrew shrugged out of his wet shirt, leaving him in just his undershirt, and hung it near the fire to dry. Julia tried not to stare at the way the damp fabric clung to his chest and shoulders, tried not to notice the way her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the storm. "I will make coffee," she said, needing something to do with her hands. She busied herself at the stove while Andrew stood by the fire, and for a while they said nothing, just listening to the rain hammer on the roof and the thunder roll across the desert. "Julia," Andrew said finally, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen before, intense and vulnerable at the same time. "I need to tell you something, and I hope it will not make you uncomfortable." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What is it?" Andrew took a step toward her, then stopped as if unsure of his welcome. "These past 2 months, working with you, watching you learn and grow stronger, I have found myself thinking about you more and more. Not just as a neighbor or someone I am helping, but as a woman I have come to care for deeply. I know my timing is terrible. I know you are still grieving your father and trying to build your life here. But I cannot keep pretending I see you as just a friend when every time I ride up to your ranch, my heart lifts at the sight of you. When every time you smile at me, I want to find ways to make you smile again. When every time I leave you, I find myself counting the hours until I can see you again." Julia stood frozen, the coffee forgotten, staring at him as his words washed over her like the rain outside. "Andrew," she whispered, not sure what she was going to say. He held up a hand. "You do not have to say anything. I know I am not much of a catch. Just a horse rancher with a modest spread and no fancy manners or connections. But I am honest, and I work hard, and I swear to you that if you could ever see me as more than a friend, I would do everything in my power to make you happy." Something broke free inside Julia's chest, all the careful restraint she had been keeping on her feelings, all the doubt and uncertainty. She crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and reached up to cup his face in her hands. "You foolish man," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Do you really not know? I have been in love with you for weeks. I just thought you could never want someone like me, with nothing to offer but a failing ranch and a stubborn determination to make something of myself." Andrew's eyes widened, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Julia," he breathed into her hair, "you have everything to offer. You are strong and brave and smart and beautiful, and I have never met anyone like you." She tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her with a hunger that matched her own, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back. Julia kissed him back with everything she had, all the loneliness and fear and hope of the past 2 months pouring into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you crying on that depot platform. You looked so lost and so determined at the same time, and I knew right then that you were someone special." "I love you too," Julia said, the words feeling natural and right. "I was so afraid to hope you might feel the same way." They kissed again, slower this time but no less intense, and Julia felt like she was finally home in a way she had not felt since her mother died. Not home in a place, but home in a person, with someone who understood her and valued her and wanted to build a life with her. The storm raged outside, but inside the small adobe house, two people who had found each other against all odds held tight and began to dream about a future together. When the rain finally stopped hours later and the stars emerged in the washed, clean sky, Andrew reluctantly said he should get back to his ranch before Mrs. Chen sent out a search party. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked, still holding Julia's hand as they stood on the porch. "Not as your teacher, but as your suitor. I want to court you properly, Julia. I want to do this right." Julia smiled up at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said. "Come back tomorrow and every day after. I will be waiting for you." He kissed her one more time, soft and sweet, and then rode off into the night, leaving Julia standing on the porch with her fingers pressed to her lips and a smile she could not suppress. She had come to Arizona expecting to find her father and instead had lost him. But in losing him, she had found something else. Purpose, strength, independence, and love. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was a good life. Maybe even a great one. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Julia had read about in novels. There were no fancy dances or elegant dinners, no theater outings or formal calls. Instead, Andrew courted her with sunrise rides across the desert, with patient help fixing her barn roof, with wildflowers he picked on his way to her ranch, with long conversations under the stars about dreams and fears and hopes for the future. He courted her with respect for her independence and support for her goals, never trying to take over her ranch or suggest she could not manage it, but always being there when she needed help or advice. Julia courted him right back, baking him his favorite pie with Mrs. Chen's help, mending his torn shirts, helping him with difficult horses that needed a gentle touch, and listening with genuine interest to his plans for breeding better stock. They worked side by side, they laughed together, they supported each other, and they fell more deeply in love with every passing day. Of course, not everyone was happy about their relationship. Margaret Sutton made her displeasure known when she heard the news, confronting Andrew in town one day when Julia was with him. "You are making a mistake," Margaret said coldly, ignoring Julia's presence entirely. "That girl has nothing. No money, no connections, no experience. She will drag you down with her when her pathetic little ranch fails." Andrew's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer to Julia in a protective gesture that made her heart swell. "Julia has everything that matters," he said firmly. "She has courage, intelligence, determination, and a good heart. Those are worth more than all the money and connections in the territory. I would appreciate it if you would speak respectfully about the woman I intend to marry." Margaret's face went white, then red with fury. "You are engaged." "Not yet," Andrew said. "But I will ask her when the time is right, and I very much hope she will say yes." Julia slipped her hand into Andrew's, feeling his fingers close around hers with possessive warmth. "He is right that I have no money or connections," she said to Margaret, keeping her voice level. "But I am learning to run my ranch, and I am proud of what I am building. And Andrew deserves someone who loves him for who he is, not for what he can do for her family's business interests. I think we are done here." They walked away together, leaving Margaret sputtering behind them, and Julia felt a fierce satisfaction. She had stood up for herself and for Andrew, had not let the other woman's venom wound her. She was not the same lost girl who had arrived in Agua Caliente in tears. She was someone stronger now, someone who knew her own worth. As summer turned to fall and the brutal heat eased into cooler weather, Julia's ranch began to thrive under her increasingly skilled management. She sold some cattle at a good profit, paid off her father's remaining debts, and even made a few improvements to the property. Andrew was there to advise and help, but she made the decisions and did most of the work herself, building the confidence and competence she needed to survive in this harsh land. In late October, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Andrew turned to her with a serious expression. "Julia, I have been thinking about something." "Oh," she said, smiling at him. "That sounds ominous." He smiled back but did not lose his serious look. "Your ranch is doing well, but it is still a struggle. You are managing alone, which is hard for anyone, man or woman. My ranch is also doing well, but I could expand if I had more land and cattle. It seems to me that if we combined our operations, we could build something really strong, something that could support a family." Julia's heart began to beat faster. "Are you suggesting what I think you are suggesting?" Andrew slid off the bench where they had been sitting and got down on one knee in front of her. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. "Julia Hamilton, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You are my partner, my best friend, and the woman I want to wake up next to every morning for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? Will you combine your ranch with mine and build a life together as husband and wife?" Tears streamed down Julia's face, but they were tears of joy this time, not sorrow. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Andrew, I will marry you. I love you so much, and I cannot imagine anything I want more than to build a life with you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, the turquoise catching the fading light. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, Andrew said, "How soon can we arrange a wedding? Because I do not think I can wait very long to make you my wife." Julia laughed, pure happiness bubbling up inside her. "As soon as we can manage it. There is no reason to wait." They were married 3 weeks later in the little church in Agua Caliente, with Mrs. Chen serving as Julia's matron of honor and Andrew's ranch hands standing up with him. It was a simple ceremony, nothing fancy or elaborate, but it was perfect. Julia wore her mother's wedding dress, which she had brought with her from Philadelphia, and Andrew wore his best suit, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Andrew kissed her in front of God and their small community, Julia felt her father's presence like a blessing, as though he were there giving his approval to this union. The reception was held at Andrew's ranch, which was now also Julia's ranch, and Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with food and decorations. The whole town seemed to turn out for the celebration, and Julia was touched by how many people had come to wish them well. Even some of the neighboring ranchers who she barely knew made an appearance, greeting her warmly and welcoming her officially to the community. Margaret Sutton did not attend, of course, but her father did, shaking Andrew's hand and congratulating them both with what seemed like genuine goodwill. "You have found yourself a fine woman, Parker," Robert Sutton said. "I hear she is running her own operation quite successfully. That takes grit out here. You are a lucky man." "I know it, sir," Andrew said, pulling Julia close against his side. "Every single day." That night, after the guests had left and Mrs. Chen had retired to her cottage, Andrew carried Julia over the threshold of the main house, which was now their home. He set her down gently in the bedroom, which Mrs. Chen had decorated with wildflowers and candles, and looked at her with such love and desire that Julia felt heat flood through her entire body. "I have dreamed of this moment for months," Andrew said softly, reaching up to gently unpin her hair so it fell in dark waves around her shoulders. "My beautiful wife." "I love the sound of that," Julia whispered, reaching up to unbutton his shirt. "My husband." They came together with tenderness and passion, exploring and learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words of love. It was Julia's first time, and Andrew was patient and careful, making sure she felt only pleasure and no fear. When they finally joined together completely, becoming husband and wife in body as well as in name, Julia felt a completeness she had never known before. This was where she belonged, in Andrew's arms, in his bed, in his life. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Julia's head resting on Andrew's chest as he ran his fingers through her hair. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Julia said honestly. "When I arrived here 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I had lost everything and I could not imagine how I would go on. But I found you, and I found myself, and now I have everything I never knew I wanted." Andrew kissed the top of her head. "I was just existing before you came along," he admitted. "Working, planning, building, but not really living. You brought color and joy and love into my life, Julia. You made me realize what I had been missing. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with a small horse ranch. Thank you for stopping on that depot platform and offering a ride home to a crying stranger," Julia said, lifting her head to kiss him. "Best decision either of us ever made." They made love again, slower this time, and then fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, beginning their married life with contentment and hope for the future. The months that followed were busy as they worked to combine their 2 ranches into one larger operation. They decided to keep Julia's old house as a line shack for when they were working on the far portions of the property. And they sold some of Julia's cattle, but kept her best breeding stock. Andrew's horse program expanded, and Julia proved to have a real talent for working with the animals, her gentle manner and quick intelligence making her a natural trainer. They worked hard, but they also made time for each other, for long rides in the cool evenings, for quiet dinners where they talked about their day, for lazy Sunday mornings in bed. Julia had never been happier, and she could see that same happiness reflected in Andrew's eyes every time he looked at her. In the spring, Julia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited until she was sure before telling Andrew. She chose a moment when they were working together in the barn, both grooming horses after a long day, and simply said, "Andrew, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the horse he was brushing, immediately alert to the tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," Julia said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Andrew froze for a moment, the brush dangling forgotten from his hand, and then a grin spread across his face so wide and joyful that Julia started laughing. He dropped the brush entirely and crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he said, setting her down carefully and placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Julia, I am so happy I could burst. Are you feeling all right? Are you tired? Do you need to rest? Should you be working in the barn?" "I am fine," Julia assured him, touched by his immediate concern. "Mrs. Chen says that women have been having babies since the beginning of time and working right up until their time comes. I am not made of glass, Andrew. I can still do my share." "I know you can," Andrew said, but his hand remained protectively on her stomach. "But I am still going to worry about you. I cannot help it. You are my whole world, Julia. You and this baby." Their son was born in January of 1884, on a cold, clear night when the stars seemed close enough to touch. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Andrew paced outside the bedroom door thinking he would lose his mind with worry. But Julia was strong, and Mrs. Chen was experienced, and when Andrew was finally allowed into the room, he found his exhausted wife holding a tiny, perfect baby boy. "Meet your son," Julia said softly, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "I thought we could name him Thomas after my father. Thomas Andrew Parker." Andrew sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face of his son, feeling his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Thomas," he said, reaching out one finger to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. Immediately, tiny fingers wrapped around his, gripping with surprising strength. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you both so much." Over the next few years, the Parker Ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more land, improved their breeding programs for both horses and cattle, and built a reputation throughout the territory for fair dealing and quality stock. Julia proved to be as good a rancher as Andrew had known she would be, managing the business side of things with skill while also raising their growing family. A second son, James, was born in 1886, and a daughter, Emma, followed in 1888. The house that had once seemed large enough for one man living alone now rang with the sounds of children's laughter, crying, playing, and learning. Mrs. Chen, who had officially retired from her housekeeping duties, but refused to actually leave the ranch, doted on the children and helped Julia manage the chaos of raising 3 active youngsters while still running a successful operation. Andrew often thought back to that afternoon at the depot, when he had seen a young woman crying on the platform and had been moved to offer help. It had been such a small thing, taking off his hat and asking if she needed a ride home, but it had changed both their lives completely. Julia had been looking for family and had found it in the form of love. Andrew had been looking for nothing in particular and had found everything he never knew he needed. One evening, when the children were finally asleep, and Andrew and Julia sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times before, Andrew pulled his wife close and said, "You ever think about how different things would be if I had not stopped at the depot that day?" Julia leaned her head against his shoulder. "All the time," she admitted. "I think about how lost and scared I was, how I had no idea what I was going to do, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to say. You saved me, Andrew." "We saved each other," Andrew corrected gently. "I was just going through the motions before you came along. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to dream bigger than just surviving. You made me want to build something lasting, something I could pass on to our children." "Well, we certainly did that," Julia said with a laugh, gesturing to the thriving ranch spread out before them. "Your modest horse ranch and my inherited cattle operation became one of the most successful spreads in the territory. Not bad for a seamstress from Philadelphia and a dusty cowboy." "Not bad at all," Andrew agreed, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Julia Parker, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too," Julia said, tilting her face up for a proper kiss. "Thank you for stopping to help a crying woman at the depot. Best ride home I ever had." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one in the darkening sky. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. The ranch that they had built together stretched out around them, a testament to hard work, determination, and the power of two people building something together. And in each other's arms, Andrew and Julia had found the home they had both been searching for all along. As the years continued to pass, the Parker Ranch became known throughout Arizona and beyond. Andrew's breeding program produced some of the finest horses in the territory, sought after by ranchers, the cavalry, and anyone who needed reliable, intelligent animals. Julia's careful management of their cattle operation and business affairs kept them profitable even in lean years, and her reputation as a shrewd but fair businesswoman opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to a woman. Their children grew strong and capable under the Arizona sun. Thomas, the eldest, inherited his father's way with horses and could gentle even the most skittish colt with patience and kindness. James was the adventurous one, always exploring the far reaches of the ranch and coming home with stories of what he had discovered. Emma, their only daughter, was as tough as her brothers and refused to be left out of any ranch work, whether it was mending fences, moving cattle, or helping in the barns. Mrs. Chen remained a beloved part of their household well into her old age, teaching the children to cook, telling them stories of China and the railroad camps, and providing a link to the past that kept them grounded and grateful for what they had. She often told the story of the day Andrew brought Julia home, a crying stranger who needed help, and how she had known immediately that the young woman would be important to Andrew's life. "I tell him she needs place to stay," Mrs. Chen would say, her eyes twinkling as the children listened raptly. "But I know already. I see the way he looks at her even then. Like she is precious thing, important thing. Your father, he has good heart. He sees someone needs help, he helps. That is how he finds your mother, and that is why you are all here now." The children loved that story and never tired of hearing it, though the details remained mostly the same each time. It became part of their family mythology, the story of how their parents met, how a tragedy had led to something beautiful, how kindness and courage had built the life they all enjoyed. There were challenges over the years, of course. Droughts that tested their water management skills, harsh winters that took a toll on the livestock, economic downturns that made selling cattle difficult, and the occasional conflict with neighbors over land or water rights. But Andrew and Julia faced each challenge together, supporting and strengthening each other, making decisions as partners, and always finding a way forward. Margaret Sutton eventually married a wealthy banker from Tucson and moved away from Agua Caliente, much to everyone's relief. Before she left, she made one final visit to the Parker Ranch, ostensibly to say goodbye, but really, Julia suspected, to see what she had missed out on when Andrew had chosen Julia over her. Julia was in the front yard with Emma, who was helping her plant a new flower garden when Margaret's fancy carriage pulled up. Julia straightened, wiping dirt from her hands, and waited as Margaret descended with the help of her driver. "Mrs. Parker," Margaret said, her tone civil if not exactly warm. "I wanted to say goodbye before I leave for Tucson. My husband has business there that will keep us away indefinitely." "I wish you well, Mrs. Sutton," Julia said honestly. "I hope you will be very happy in Tucson." Margaret looked around at the well-maintained ranch, at the comfortable house with its wide porch and flower gardens, at little Emma, who was watching the visitor with frank curiosity. "You have done well for yourself," she said, and there was something in her voice that might have been respect or might have been regret. "I thought Andrew was making a mistake choosing you, but I can see now that I was wrong. This place, this life, it suits you both." "Thank you," Julia said, meaning it. "That is kind of you to say." Margaret hesitated, then said, "I wanted what Andrew could give me, the security and status, but I never wanted him the way you obviously do. I see that now. He deserves to be loved for himself, not for what he can provide. I hope you know how lucky you are. I do, Julia said firmly. Every single day. After Margaret left, Emma tugged on Julia's skirt and asked, "Who was that lady, Mama?" "Someone who taught me an important lesson," Julia said, kneeling down to her daughter's level. "She taught me that the things that really matter in life are not money or status, but love and family and building something meaningful with people you care about. Your father and I have all of that, and that makes us richer than any amount of money could." Emma nodded seriously as if she understood completely and then said, "Can we finish planting the flowers now? I want to surprise Papa when he comes home." "Yes, sweetheart," Julia said, hugging her daughter close. "Let us make something beautiful together." That evening, when Andrew returned from checking on cattle in the far pasture and found the new flower garden, he swept Julia into his arms and kissed her soundly, much to the children's giggling delight. "You make everything beautiful," he told her. "The house, the ranch, our life. I fall in love with you more every day." "Good," Julia said, smiling up at him. "Because I plan on keeping you around for a very long time, Andrew Parker. We have a lot more life to build together." And build they did. Over the decades that followed, the Parker Ranch became an institution in Arizona, known not just for quality livestock, but for the integrity and generosity of its owners. Andrew and Julia were pillars of their community, helping neighbors in need, supporting the local church and school, and raising their children to value hard work, fairness, and compassion. When Thomas grew to adulthood, he took over much of the day-to-day management of the horse breeding program, bringing his own innovations and ideas while respecting the foundation his father had built. James, after a few years of wandering and adventure, returned home to focus on expanding their cattle operation into new territories. Emma, despite her parents' offers to send her east for education and culture, chose to stay on the ranch, eventually marrying a young veterinarian who established his practice in Agua Caliente and worked closely with the Parker family. As Andrew and Julia grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibilities to their children, though neither ever fully retired. They were too invested in the ranch, too connected to the land and the animals and the work to simply step away. But they did allow themselves more time together, taking long rides through the desert they both loved, sitting on the porch in comfortable silence, and telling stories to their growing number of grandchildren. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Andrew had a surprise for Julia. He led her out to the old depot platform in Agua Caliente, which was still standing though the town had grown considerably around it over the years. He positioned her at the exact spot where he had first seen her, crying over her father's death and uncertain of her future. "You remember?" he asked softly, taking both her hands in his. "How could I forget?" Julia said, tears in her eyes but a smile on her face. "It was the worst and best day of my life. I lost my father, but I met you." "I took off my hat," Andrew said, removing his hat now in an echo of that long-ago gesture, "and I asked if you needed a ride home, and you said you had no home." "But I was wrong," Julia said, understanding what he was doing. "I did have a home, I just had not found it yet. It was not a place. It was you. You are my home, Andrew. You always have been." Andrew pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the afternoon sun beat down on them just as it had 25 years before. "And you are mine," he murmured into her hair. "Thank you for saying yes to that ride home all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy. Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for stopping," Julia said, pulling back to look up at him with all the love she felt shining in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me when I was lost and offering help. Thank you for teaching me how to be strong. Thank you for loving me." They kissed there on the depot platform, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and had built something lasting and beautiful together. Around them, the town of Agua Caliente went about its business, but for Andrew and Julia, there was only each other, only this moment, only the gratitude for a chance meeting that had changed everything. As they grew even older, into their 60s and 70s, Andrew and Julia remained devoted to each other and to the land they had built their life on. They watched with pride as their children continued to expand and improve the ranch, as their grandchildren learned the same lessons they had learned about hard work and integrity, and as the Parker name became synonymous with quality and fairness throughout Arizona. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, surrounded by the family she had helped raise and who loved her dearly. At her funeral, Julia spoke about the kindness the older woman had shown her when she first arrived, frightened and alone, and how Mrs. Chen had become a second mother to her and a grandmother to her children. They buried her in the family plot on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "Beloved friend and family. She taught us that home is built with love." In their final years together, Andrew and Julia spent most of their time on the porch of the house they had shared for so many decades, watching the sun rise and set over land that 4 generations of Parkers had now called home. Their bodies were worn from years of hard work, their hands gnarled and scarred, their faces deeply lined, but their love for each other remained as strong and vital as it had been on that first day. Andrew passed first, quietly, sitting in his favorite chair with Julia holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for the ride home, my love. It was a beautiful journey." Julia mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together, and in the knowledge that she had lived a life full of love and purpose. She remained sharp and engaged until her own final day, still offering advice about ranch management, still telling stories about the old days, still insisting that the best decision she ever made was accepting a ride from a cowboy who stopped to help a crying woman at a depot. When Julia passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, her children and grandchildren gathered to remember her life and to celebrate the love story that had started their family. They told the story again, the one that never got old, about the woman waiting at the depot in tears and the cowboy who took off his hat and asked if she needed a ride home. They buried Julia next to Andrew on the hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones side by side, united in death as they had been in life. The inscription on Julia's stone, chosen by her children, reads simply, "She found her home and her heart, beloved wife, mother, and partner." And on that hill, as seasons turned and years passed, the Parker family continued to thrive, building on the foundation that Andrew and Julia had laid. The ranch grew and changed with the times, but its core values remained the same: hard work, integrity, compassion, and the understanding that the greatest wealth is not measured in land or money, but in the love and family you build along the way. The story of Andrew and Julia became legend in Agua Caliente, told and retold at community gatherings and family dinners, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness. A man sees a woman in need and offers help. A woman takes a chance on a stranger and finds her home. Two people build a life together through hard work, dedication, and unwavering love. And it all started with a cowboy who took off his hat and asked a crying woman at a depot if she needed a ride home. That single moment of compassion changed 2 lives, created a family, built a legacy, and proved that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Arizona desert, love could take root and flourish beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Their great-grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren after them would stand on that porch and look out over the land their ancestors had worked so hard to build, and they would remember the story of how it all began. They would remember that Julia had come west to find her father and found so much more. They would remember that Andrew had simply wanted to help someone in need and ended up finding the love of his life. And they would remember that the best journeys often begin with unexpected detours, that the greatest loves often start with simple kindness, and that home is not a place you find but something you build with the people you love, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. The Parker Ranch stood as a testament to that truth. Generations after Andrew and Julia had taken their final rest on the hill overlooking the land they loved. And though many years had passed since that hot afternoon in June of 1882, the essence of their story remained as vital and meaningful as ever. That love and determination can overcome any obstacle, that kindness is never wasted, and that sometimes the worst days of our lives lead us to the best things that will ever happen to us. Julia had waited at the depot in tears, lost and alone. Andrew had taken off his hat and asked if she needed a ride home. And from that single moment of connection, a lifetime of love had grown, strong and true and enduring. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth celebrating. It was a story that proved that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of finding home in unexpected places. There is always the chance that a stranger's kindness might change your life forever. And for Andrew and Julia Parker, that chance had become everything.